Hi, this is Chris Hoy. Thank you for joining me on Create with Chris. This adorable snowman door hanger is created with layers of separate pieces, making it a quick and easy project that anyone can paint. Using simple tips, tricks, and techniques, watch this magical transformation. So, whether you are a beginner or painting for fun, grab your brushes and let's get started. The Snowman kit actually comes with 21 separate pieces, which is really nice because it does not need to be traced and all the pieces painted separately. I did base coat this very loosely, started out with sand gray just to give a soft background, and then adding white. And I did this several times. I'm kind of using a slip slap technique. It's not smooth and even, but it does give it a fluffy, kind of a snow look. I start heavy in the middle, blend it out toward the edges. I do this quite a few times to build up the strength of the white, and that allows the snowman to have dimension and still keeps that soft background. The hat is just base coated a soft black, and I added some of that sand gray as a highlight just to give a little bit of a shimmer to the hat. It's not smooth and even. I like that almost a frosty look. Traced on where the hat and the scarf fit, so that way I know exactly where my shading needs to be applied. And I did start out with a brown, but I didn't like how that looked, and I switched over to a blue, but I didn't film that part. So the technique is the same, it's just a little bit of a different color. And I'm using my 1/2 inch angle. Again, it's not a smooth float. I just kind of very loosely float that on and tap it in. The nose, base coated it with an orange, and then I'm just adding some shading with a darker color and going back again with my 1/2 inch angle and very loosely applying in a lighter orange and strengthening that darker shading, and it gives a lot of dimension, not hard to do. The eyes are a simple soft black, and believe me, it's hard to hang on to these pieces. You can use a double-sided tape, but I like to use my stylus because it doesn't leave a mark, and I can, it's a little bit easier to manipulate. A little bit of shading with the winter blue in the eyes, and I'll do the same thing on the mouth coals, just so they look very similar. Not hard to do, it just adds that little bit of a highlight. This is Snow White, and I use my stylus to dip dot and create comma strokes. It's a super easy way to add that little bit of sparkle. When I do the mouth coals, I just downsize to a smaller tip on my stylus. They're all different, so don't be particular about whether they look all the same. The holly leaves are Hauser light green, just a simple base coat. And again, I'm using my 1/2 inch angle to very loosely float on plantation pine to give a little bit of depth. I did kind of lay the berries on there to make sure that I'm not going to have any empty areas when I put them on. You don't want to have to worry about that. The highlights are celery shoot, just a quick float. You can see how loose it is. I like that look of, to me it almost gives it a soft movement. And I'm using my 1/4 inch angle when on the smaller areas just for a little bit more control. Base coat every red section first with melon, and then I can top coat it with the watermelon slice. It provides a brighter base, and the red's going to be more of a glowing red instead of a solid red. Shading deep burgundy on the berries. Gosh, I had to get out that stylus because these things just are tiny and a little bit hard to hang on to. Adding some highlights with melon, and I know it's a little messy, but I'm going back with some more shading to clean all of that up. I'm not too fussy about how I paint. I spend more time on the details, but I'm not messy either. To create the hat band, I just used, and any design would work, just a pretty swirly design. This is the Flourish stencil from the Stencilette sets. I like these are small stencils, but they have some really nice designs in them. Shade around the bottom edge with deep burgundy. And you can see I went back and floated the snowman in blue. Creating the cheeks, I'm using my number 5 Spectacular Stencil, Watermelon Slice. I like to create both of them at the same time, and that way they balance out. For the scarf, it's a very simple base coat of melon and Hauser Light Green. I'm using a number 10 flat, and I use that to space the stripes out. I didn't trace them on. I'm just using the width of the brush to create that stroke. Top coating those red sections with Watermelon Slice, and it just needs, I did the melon and then the Watermelon Slice. I just did one coat of each and it looked beautiful. I did go back and add a second coat on the Hauser Light Green just because it was a little washy and I could see my brush strokes. So pay attention. You can tell if it's going to need more than one coat just simply by how well it's covered. Now I wanted to create that cable knit look because the top and the bottom roll of the scarf were kind of curved. I stenciled in the top half of the cable and then the bottom half, and I did use my painter's pal to kind of mask off so I didn't get any of the melon from the cable knit onto the green areas. And again, this is one of the stencils. When I get into the sections that are pretty much straight up and down, I just did a single stencil instead of breaking that into the top half and the bottom half. Definitely on these going across, change the direction of the cable knit. It's just a repetitive. They're not super bright and solid, but they're not really faint either. I load my stencil brush, wipe it on a paper towel to remove the excess paint so I don't have a heavy load, and then stencil the design. On the green stripes, I'm using the same concept, but I'm going with celery shoot to create those cable knit. And you can tell some of them are too faint. I would rather have it too faint and need to go back and brighten it up than to have it too heavy where it becomes a little bit messy. Once you wipe your brush off after you load it, you kind of get the hang of what's enough and not enough. Now, it doesn't look bad here, but I did go back and shade it pretty heavily just about everywhere. Both sides of each section and then the in-between where the lace crease is across it as well. Using plantation pine, it's going to mute that cable knit a little bit, but it's not covering it up. It's very thin, so make sure that you allow the shading to let those stitches kind of glow through. Once you start adding the shading on both sides and then across the bottom, it's almost magical the way that it transforms from a very flat scarf section with just a little bit design into something that's very dimensional and very rich and just really looks realistic. And just continue this on. This does take a little bit of time, but wow, what a difference a little bit of paint makes. And I say that so often. A little bit of paint makes a big difference. And just see how it transforms. Everything I used in this project will be listed below, so make sure you check out those links. The mittens, again, are melon, top coated with Watermelon Slice. The cuffs on the mittens, I decided to create those to match the scarf. So they are base coated with the Hauser Light Green shading, the mittens with deep burgundy. Wanted to add a little bit of design on the mittens, so I'm using the snowflake from my Sparkle Pal and just stenciling that snowflake on there. And I did go back, and white's kind of crazy because you do need a couple coats to get it on nice and tidy. I did use the curves from the other Painter's Pal to kind of mask off so I didn't get white where it doesn't need to be. Now I'm adding the cabled stitches on the cuff of the mitten and using the celery shoot just like we did on the scarf. Shading around the outer edge with plantation pine. Thought it still looked a little bit plain after I put this on, so I decided mittens have ribbing on them, so I decided to just shade down between each row of cable stitches, and it really turned out to be quite cute. The sign for the welcome letters is kind of plain, so I decided to jazz it up a little bit, base coating it sand gray. I thought white would be too blend in too much with the snowman, so I'm giving it the same base that I did the snowman, taking my texture graining brush and just lightly pulling it across from the left side toward the middle and from the right side toward the middle. There's never any stop and start lines. The brush is amazing, creates beautiful wood graining very, very easily. Using my number 5 radical round to top coat the letters with melon and then once again with watermelon slice. Such a simple way keeps the paint from running down the edges. To add the pieces, it was much easier. I know the eyes and nose and mouth all need shading around them, but it was going to be hard to kind of hold them in place and shade. So I decided it's much easier to wait until the end and then glue them down and shade around them as it makes sense. So I put the eyes in, shaded around the eyes, shaded below the eyebrows, and then go back with my Epic script liner, add the eyebrows and the eyelashes. So much easier than try to figure out where it's at. Same thing for the nose. Glue it in place, and I'm using quick grip adhesive, which is amazing. It dries very quickly and it holds forever. It will never come off. Once it's in place, then I can go ahead and shade around it. I work from the top to the bottom, so I don't have to try to work around the pieces that are above. So do the eyes first, then the nose, and shade each one afterwards. It makes it so much easier to go back and shade. Everything's where it needs to be. It's very easy to pop that shading in there quickly. It's a loose shade. I let it be kind of fluffy and uneven. Back to the eyes, make sure you don't put too much under the eyes or he does look a little bit weary. Epic script liner, Snow White. I wanted to put some kind of a sparkle on his cheeks, and I'm using the handle end of my brush to really accent the tips of that sparkle. Drop down to my stylus for the rest of the dots so they're not all big and the same. Make sure when you glue these pieces you hold it long enough to make sure that the edges are tight and in the correct spacing. Using that Prussian blue to add shading around it. If it becomes too blue and too strong, I just picked up a little bit of winter blue to kind of tone it down and shaded it on that way. Loose strokes. The button is soft black, and then I put the string on there with sand gray. Went back and added a little bit of soft black shading between the overlaps. A little bit of watermelon slice to create the look of a baker's twine, and then glue that on. Make sure you shade around the bottom of the button. I think I did that. I forgot to do that before I glued the sign on, and it was a little bit tricky to get in around the sign. So it does help to have everything glued on in the correct order. I wanted to make sure where everything was going to be before I glued it in place. And so I did the letters first, then the sign, then the mittens. And go back and add just a little bit of shading underneath the snowman to make sure that you have that nice drop shadow. The pieces may be varnished separately before gluing in place or easily spray varnished after they are attached. I did splatter it heavily with Snow White to create the snowfall. To add some holiday sparkle, I used Glamour Dust and applied it to the snow on the hat, nose, cheeks, mittens, and sign. Everything I used is listed in the links below, including the surface, pattern, and supplies. I love how this turned out, and I think you will too. Let me know if you have any comments or questions. I would love to hear from you. If you like what you see, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. That helps me out, and you won't miss out on future upcoming videos. I hope you learned a few new tips, tricks, and techniques to make your painting life a little easier and a lot more fun. Remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to our next painting adventure together.